Hello, listeners, and welcome to a new episode of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. This is a special edition of the show as we are conducting a panel discussion on the recently released Hunger Games novel, Sunrise on the Reaping. Before we introduce my wonderful panelists that are joining me, I do want to note that all episodes of the Fanbase Weekly this month are sponsored by Hellmouth Con. That is the Buffy and Angel themed con coming to Southern California, Torrance, California specifically. We're honored to have Hellmouth Con as a sponsor and look forward to sharing more about that event later in the show. But let's move on to the panel. I do want to introduce them. First off, for anyone that doesn't know who I am, I'm Bryant Dillon. I am co-founder of Fanbase Press and also co-host of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. I'll be your moderator for this episode. And we are joined by a number of fantastic you guess they're almost tributes for the discussion, if you will, if we want to get really dark. Let's start off with Jessica Maison, who is a writer whose work explores a wide variety of themes, including family, survival, injustice, and the environment. Plastic Girl is her coming of age series set in a climate apocalypse, and Mary Shelley's School for Monsters is her horror graphic novel series. More about her and her company can be found at wickedtreepress.com. Jessica, welcome back for another Hunger Games discussion.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Of course. Next up, we have Ashley V. Robinson. She's a three-time Ringo-nominated comic book writer whose credits include Jupiter Jet and Aurora and the Eagle. And Ashley is also co-host of the Geek History Lesson podcast. Ashley, welcome back to the show.
District 4. District 4. That's all I'm here for.
Excellent, excellent. We're already dividing the people.
Exactly.
Last but not least, we're also joined by Rebecca Lear. She's a Hunger Games super fan who has forced all of her friends to read the original trilogy of books back in the day, and then also forced everyone to attend the midnight screening of the first film, including myself and Barbara. We were there. And The Hunger Games was a gateway book into a full-blown dystopian YA fantasy, sci-fi, and romantasy book obsession that finds her reading around 100 books per year. So excellent. Becca, you neglected to mention it, but we also worked on a really meaningful, I would say, fan project, the KATNISS Chronicles, which is an audio drama
Yes.
adaptation of those first three books.
I wasn't sure if I should call that out, to be totally
No
honest, but
worries.
it's one of my most favorite things that we've done.
I feel exactly the same, and so glad to have you as part of this discussion. So thanks for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, I will offer a spoiler warning. Anyone who has not finished the book, which, hey, understandable, it just came out. Please come back because we're going to spoil all of it. We're just going to cover everything. So if you are worried about spoilers, come to this conversation after you've had a time to finish. Sunrise on the Reaping is a 2025 dystopian novel written by the American author Suzanne Collins, and the second prequel novel to the original The Hunger Games trilogy following 2020's The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Set 24 years before the events of the first novel, the narrative delves into themes of political manipulation, the power of propaganda, and the complexities of societal control under a totalitarian regime, and centers on the experiences of Haymitch Abernathy. The story begins on the morning of the reaping of the 50th Hunger Games, also known as the Second Quarter Quell, which is won by Haymitch. As shown in Catching Fire by the Capitol's tapes, for the Second Quarter Quell, the Capitol reaped twice the number of tributes to compete in the Hunger Games. This is in keeping with the tradition of adding a cruel twist to the games for each quarter quell. The arena for the games appears to be luscious, but nearly everything is poisonous. While in the arena, Haymitch allies himself with fellow District 12 tribute Maisley Donner, who saves his life by shooting a poisonous dart into a fellow tribute. Haymitch realizes that a force field surrounds the arena and that anything thrown at it bounces back before hearing Maisley being killed by genetically modified birds. In his final showdown with a career girl from District 1, Haymitch strategically dodges her axe throw and allows it to hit the force field, where it bounces back and hits her in the face, killing her and making him the winner of the games since he has outlasted the other tributes. Unfortunately, as punishment for using the arena to his advantage, Haymitch's mother, brother, and girlfriend are all murdered upon orders from President Snow. Haunted by this loss, Haymitch retreats into isolation in the victor's village, distancing himself from former friends out of fear for their safety. Yet during the victor's tour, Plutarch's encouragement spurs him to keep fighting. In the epilogue set after the original series, Haymitch begins to open up to Katniss and Peeta about his past, finding a measure of solace in caring for gifted goose eggs in memory of Lenore Dove. Now, this novel has sold over 1.5 million copies worldwide in its first week, marking it the biggest debut of any title in Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games series. In the United States alone, the book sold 1.2 million copies, more than twice the opening sales of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and over 3 times that of Mockingjay. Now, critics have been very kind and supportive of this book. The New York Times called Sunrise on the Reaping a brutal, propulsive, and heart-wrenching addition to the Hunger Games series. Capesandtights.com said the prequel is an unforgettable reading experience that is full of action and emotion that actually rivals the first novel in many ways. And Pace Magazine raved that Collins' second Hunger Games prequel is genuinely outstanding. A prequel that deftly balances an emotional origin story with a shrewd exploration of propaganda in Panem. It's also important to know that a film adaptation has already been announced. It's in production and is set to be released by Lionsgate on November 20th, 2026. But I want to know what the three of you really think about this novel. What are your first general reactions to finishing Sunrise on the Reaping? And also I would love if you want to add what's your personal relationship, with this franchise or with these novels. Jessica, why don't you start us off?
Okay. Well, let's see. My personal relationship with these novels is that I think I read the first one when I was a new mother. And I just devoured them. I read one and couldn't stop. I had to read all three of them like in less than a week, which is, I don't know if you're a new mother ever, that's a feat. And I just related so much. I just loved the way she wrote young people. I loved how she put them in these situations that explored war and conflict and propaganda, all that stuff, and did it in this really great, dramatic, horrible, not great, but horrible setting, and just in a weird way, brought out the best in every single character that's in the arena, which I thought was amazing. Doing it individually, and she did do that again in this book. I think you got to see most of the characters best at their best. Especially one of my new favorites, Maisie Lee. I thought I always love a character that you think you're gonna hate, and then you end up loving. And so I do really think it's a great addition to the Hunger Games. It's not my favorite one, but I did really enjoy it. And I mean, Haymitch is probably one of my top 3 favorite characters in the Hunger Games. So I think everyone was dying to know more about him and to watch his story. So I was not disappointed in that. So
Excellent, excellent.
yeah.
Ashley, what are your thoughts on Sunrise on the Reaping?
Yeah, so all I want from Sunrise on the Reaping is it to outsell Onyx Storm. So I need to get that off the bat right from the start. If you have not purchased your copy, please do it. I would consider it a personal favor if we could knock Fourth Wing off of the best-selling book of the year. Although I will be extra petty and say that Sunrise on the Reaping is much higher rated. I have also read all the Fourth Wing books, so
I mean, I have too, so it's like
it's only a drag on me, really. It's been so interesting for me reading these 2 prequel stories because Suzanne Collins has this uncanny ability to pick characters that I don't care about and don't want any more story from. And then I've been wrong both times so far. Like, I am the very basic girl out here being like, give me Finnick's book. That's all I want. And like, I just want the pretty boy, and tell me that he was sad and cried one time.
that's so funny.
That's what I've really loved about reading them, and why I knew I was going to read Sunrise on the Reaping very early, because I was one of the people who waited on Songbirds and Snakes. I actually waited to see what Barbara and Bryant had to say about it, because I knew they would be a great litmus test for whether it was worth my time or not. And it was like an emphatic, like, yes, should be I checked out all the coverage, so I was like, okay, I will go right to Sunrise on. And boy, was I wrong. I'm happy to say I feared that because this is so much closer to the time that we know from the Hunger Games, that it was going to be a little bit like, oh, Katniss Redux, Katniss Light, and I know we're going to get into spoilers, but it's very much not that, which I thought was really impressive. I think it's easily, like to echo Jessica, the best written of the 5 books we've had so far. And just to deliver this fun fact about me, like it's a flex, but it's not a flex. My first audition in Los Angeles was for Katniss, and it's about as far as it went, so it's not that good a story. So my connection to the Hunger Games and how seriously I take my opinion is very deep and real.
Well, we appreciate it and we take it very seriously as well here. Becca, what are your thoughts on this new Hunger Games game and what's your relationship with the franchise?
I really loved the book. I really loved the expansion of the world. I was cheering every time a character that I recognized came in, especially Effie, because, and I'll talk about that later, but I was very, very excited to see her in particular. Um, and yeah, I was just very like I basically stayed. I read it in one day. I just stayed up all night and read it, which is very on brand for me. But uh, and my relationship to this book, as I told you in my bio, is probably a little bit of an unhealthy obsession. Where when I moved to Los Angeles, my very first internship I had, my boss, who was like in charge of the interns, was like, "You should read these books. I think you would like them." And I started reading them. Mockingjay wasn't even out yet, so I read The Hunger Games and I read Catching Fire, and then I immediately, as I mentioned, made every single person I know read them as well. And then they were really mad at me because obviously it ends on a cliffhanger and like Mockingjay wasn't out yet. And then, as I also mentioned, when the movie came out, I bought 20 tickets immediately to the midnight showing and was like, great, I'm just going to find 20 people to come to this screening with me. And Francis Lawrence actually showed up and introduced the screening, as you probably remember, Bryant, because you were there with me. Um, so, yeah, I would call it unhealthy obsession is my relationship with all of these books.
No, I don't think I don't know if it's unhealthy, but I was definitely caught in the obsession net. And I don't know. There are so many things I love about these stories and these characters.
Oh wait, it wasn't Francis Lawrence. It was
It was
Gary.
Gary, what's his
What's
name?
his name?
I'm forgetting his
Sorry.
name right now, though.
Revisionist history.
Yeah, director
The
of
first director,
Pleasantville.
not the other one.
That was
Yes,
from before the snap. It was
Yes, yeah. Sorry,
right,
Gary
sorry.
right,
Dillon's now,
right.
I'm
but
so sorry.
No, it's okay. Francis Lawrence has directed everything else, so it
Yeah,
makes sense that
he's
we
the one that matters.
But yeah, it's fascinating. I thank you, Becca, for having a hand in getting me obsessed with these books. And I remember that time. I remember ripping through those first 2 books, waiting for that third one to come out, and like just driving in my car. I think I had a dog walking job at the time, so I spent a lot of time in my car driving in the Hollywood Hills, and I would just listen to. I remember listening to a lot of Lacuna Coil, if anyone knows that band, and like just daydreaming about the Hunger Games. And I just got so obsessed with it that I was part of the inciting force that we mentioned. Brought Becca and a few other friends, Barbara included, to do an audio drama adaptation before the films came out, and just because we were so inspired by it. And I echo everyone's thoughts about this book. I am so impressed at how close it flies to the sun and that it doesn't melt. Everything that you would think about like a reboot or a soft reboot or an additional chapter, you're like, oh, I don't know, on paper, that doesn't make sense. Should we see all these characters we know? Should they all be connected to Haymitch? I don't know. That sounds really dangerous, but it works so well. I remember reading parts of it when I was like, well, of course he knows these people. Like, I don't know why it's not obvious to me, but it wasn't at the time. And as you start to like fall in place and go like, well, yeah, he had these relationship with all these victors previously, like he had to meet some of them the first the first round. So much of that was so interesting, and then to have reveals about characters we knew. You know, we have characters who lose people or suffer trauma in this story. Lots of people who obviously suffer trauma, but it just seems to be such intelligent, thoughtful, subtle storytelling and weaving. What I find really interesting is I was a little more distanced from Songbirds and Snakes. I liked it, but it felt separate, you know? And this one has sort of grown the entire book series together. There are tendrils that I was like, I didn't realize she was planting these seeds with these characters in that first prequel, but now they pay off in so many interesting ways, and it doesn't feel retconned necessarily to me. It feels like even if this wasn't known, it just again feels like a natural fit. Um,
It feels like she had and I think this would have been before iPhones, but I don't know what time is.
mhm.
It feels like she had a note on her phone where she was like, "These are great lines that I wrote. These are interesting bits." And then they paid off now because I think one of the first things that we're told about Haymitch is that he's a drunk bum, and he's a drunk bum because he comes out of one of the most violent Hunger Games
Right.
ever. And just knowing that, the entire book makes sense. And that's like some random line from chapter 4 of the first Hunger Games
Right,
books.
right. Well, and then I think even more like how fascinating and how interesting to show us his games in that second book in Catching Fire, and then not hint in any way. Like we should have known, hey, this isn't everything, you know? The games are always manipulated. We're always shown a version, but to approach like, hey, we're going to do a sequel with the idea of, well, what if what you saw was the propaganda and here is the real events that happened underneath it. It's just so interesting and intelligent and so thematically I don't know. So the DNA of it is already in the trilogy. It doesn't feel like, oh, we just had to think up another story. It feels like it's supporting the main thrust of the story. And now I feel like, and we'll get into this, but what's really interesting is I would love to talk to you all in a little bit about the idea of how rebellion and resistance manufactures and how it's generational and how this story is now revealing like, hey, this fight who you have come in and thought was Katniss's, and sure, we see in that story, oh, it's everyone's fight, but she is just one figure over decades of suffering and decades of protest and decades of attempts. And she just happens to be the tipping point, which is really interesting to illustrate in a fictional story like this. But what I would love to turn to is scenes that stuck out to you. There's so many fantastic scenes in this book. So let's go around and just figure out what everyone thinks, really, really stood out to them in their first reading of the book. Becca, why don't you start us off on this? What stands out to you?
Oh my gosh, how do I pick? The first thing that obviously stood out to me was like the Cubby connection and the connections to Songbird and Snake and like the medallion slash flint fire starter that Leonore gives him that is like literally Songbirds and Snakes. I'm like, but I only have like more questions. I'm like, wait, but what does this mean? Where are you going with this, Suzanne? Um, Hearing about Wirus's games really struck me as well. I was fascinated by that. And again, I feel like you only kind of get, Haymitch only saw what they wanted him to see. So I feel like there's more there. And then the conversations that he has with BT around like trying to take down the arena and then knowing that it's literally 25 years later when they accomplish this. And you're like, holy shit. Those are like the first three that just like immediately came to my mind.
No, those are great ones, and that situation with BT is so interesting too because we see such a personal moment of him losing his son and being forced to mentor his son into the games as
Yeah,
punishment for some transgression. He lives with that for years, for decades, and doesn't give up
yeah.
somehow, which is really interesting. Ashley, what stood out to you? What scenes are, the big ones?
I mean, I'll take what you said with big ones to heart. I'm gonna go with the really basic choice. And were any of us not actually weeping for Maisley's death? Like, there's a lot of I know. If anyone's not watching this, the way Jessica just covered her face was the entire mood. There are so many epic deaths in here, like John Wick style. Like, this movie is gonna be something, and I hope they get a 666 fight director to make it as cool as possible. But like, it's there's a lot of interesting deaths for a number of reasons. But the way Maisley's death also ties into, again, so many other aspects that we're familiar with or we sort of know are coming, like Jabberjays, the whole situation with Welly. Like, it's impactful and built up because she's like the character we all want to be, right? In the course of the book. So you know it's coming because you know Haymitch wins, so you know you're going to be devastated by it. But then just the way it unspools from that scene where his heart is being stomped on into all these other interesting aspects of the book and the larger narrative. As I was making my notes and like thinking back on this, and I was like, it's the obvious answer, but it's like it's the thing I'll be thinking about, until I inevitably enter the games.
It's so interesting. I don't know if interesting is the right word. I guess it's so admirable, I would say, in a sense that Suzanne Collins writes for this audience, this demographic. And
Mm-hmm.
and I was reading this whole book, and I should have known because this is one of the reasons I bonded with those books. She doesn't blink. She's telling serious stories. They have violence. They cut out your heart sometimes. That's the point. But yeah, there were so many times in this book where I was like, I know where we have to go, but you're not really going to go there, are you? Um, and she went there every time. I mean, I think of was it Welly? The last one. I mean, I feel like the last couple chapters, maybe the last 20 pages of this book, I found myself brought to tears many times unexpectedly. Maisley is a good one, but the fact when Haymitch has that moment where he loses Welly, where he
Yeah.
goes away. She's begging him not to, but he has to, and then she dies, and I don't even know what to say. There's the power of that moment is palpable.
Brian, you talking about that is so interesting because it's made me realize the scene that you were talking about with Rebecca about BT, like how much of a gift that is, because he is this character that we know, and it is an actually really nice expansion of their dynamic. And you're like, well, I know he makes it to catching fire, so he won't get nerfed in this one, and my heart won't get stomped on. Like, what a gift that is at the beginning of the book before, and what we've known since Rue, right? Before
Hmm.
Suzanne Collins just says, I'll step on your heart too."
Well, and what a parallel to like I can't think about this, especially now with the generational stories, and not think about like how it's a parallel to resistance movements, fights for civil rights, or rights of any kind, human rights within our own world, because they are essentially taking the heroes of the oppressed and just crushing them over and over. When you think about the idea that BT did something, he went to the Hunger Games, he did something that, insulted the Capitol, was punished for that by putting his child in there. And then what, like decades later, is then forced to go back into the games as a final punishment. I mean, it's just it
Children's
feels, yeah.
literature, folks. Children's literature.
It's very, I guess it's very relevant as we live in a world that gets crueler and crueler. But yeah, I just wanted to say I was struck by how well Collins handles not blinking in those moments. That whole end is a lot of pain, but worthwhile. Not for exploitive sense, I guess. Yeah. Jessica, what scene stood out to you?
Well, I was very taken aback by Luella. Um, and one thing that all of the scenes that you guys are referencing, the one thing that I love about Haymitch and what they brought to it is he's such that guy friend. He's such a good older brother, a good like ally. Even when he doesn't want to be, he's there, and he's not being parental. He's being like equal, and I love that about the character and what they gave him because it leads up to Katniss in this really great way. But Luella got me so bad because I was like, oh, they're allies, and I know she's gonna die, but I don't know, did anyone actually expect her to die before they went into the arena? And then they brought Lulu in, and then that was heartbreaking. And then he's forced, and then like Maisley's like his last possible choice, and she goes, "You don't even want me. He doesn't want to be with us." And then they just become the best team. And I don't know, those all the really intimate moments with him and those strong female characters, all very different. Even when they're at their weakest, like you said, Wiley. It's Wiley, right? I always forget. Oh, yeah, Welly. And when she's starving, she's even being strong. They're just all those little moments with those all those female characters and him were just really nice. I mean, they were just really profound and beautiful, and I just loved how they just all were holding on to what was them and talking about it. Like that's what maybe the trauma does of living in that world is that it was right there on the surface all the time, and they're always exploring it, even when they're just eating something, or it's like always being talked about. Yeah. So, I mean, Luella really got me and led up to all of this. And then they replaced her, and that was the worst. That scene in Plutarch with Snow was very intense. And I didn't look up Plutarch through the whole book. I'm like, I know he's a main character somewhere. I'm gonna have to, and then I got done reading the book. I'm like, oh, he's that main character, which was like, I should have looked it up while I was, but I read it in a day and a half too. So I was like, oh, I'll get to it. Yeah. Yeah. So I loved a lot of the scenes, but those got me for
No,
sure.
those were all fantastic scenes. The library scene it was a very intense and interesting one. And
Hmm.
it's interesting how we have so much revealed about Plutarch and even Snow, more about Snow that is revealing, but also still caged in mystery to some
Yeah.
degree. That's really fascinating. Um, the one thing that I wanted to mention before we move on to another topic is just the epilogue. As someone who loved the first trilogy, I had a very distinct emotional memory of getting Mockingjay, and tearing through it and finishing it. I think my wife was asleep somewhere in the house. I finished it by myself. I sat there and I cried. And I was like, this is perfect. Like it just hit every note for me and was such a well written and much needed story about trauma and what war does to all of us and that you can come back from it, but that you still live with it day to day, no matter what. It's both hopeful but appropriately bleak in in some ways. And I just felt like this was the same deal. It was such a treat. And again, I feel like one of those things where it could be dangerous, like, oh, we're gonna dip back into, past the ending. But it was such a treat to see Haymitch sort of admit some of these things and just get a tiny little peek into like, yeah, there's still healing, They're trying to live with all this that they've been through, but things are better to some degree, that things can get better to some degree. So I think that's a really important message that these books carry. Um, let's dive more into Haymitch. We've got this interesting protagonist, someone we think we knew, who, we find a very different side of. How does he work as a protagonist for everyone? And is there anything that you feel like this book revealed about Haymitch that you were unaware of or did not realize previously? Ashley, why don't you start us off on this one?
It's funny because even though he's presented to us here as a teenager, I think because this is a prequel, he's still weirdly daddy throughout the whole story. And when we see him taking on these mentor roles, it reminded me, if you're a comic books reader, a lot of how Wolverine just picks whatever helpless teenage girl is around and is like, I'm your daddy now, don't worry about it. It's one of my favorite tropes, is like an older male mentor looking after a young female. Arguably, he doesn't succeed very well because most of them don't make it out alive. But seeing that nurturing aspect, I found very profound. Like I said, hey, I could have taken her left, Haymitch, before that. Just didn't really factor for me. And I do think he's a good mentor figure for Katniss, and it's that interesting dynamic where he learns as much from her as she does from him. But to see that there's been a thread of that always narratively running through who he is as a person, and then so much of it, whew, I'm gonna get emotional, hanging on the death of his family. I thought that was like really humanizing and really illuminating about the man that he comes to be, sort of at the beginning of the Hunger Games.
I definitely agree with all that. I think that's definitely
You
some
agree that he's
fascinating.
daddy? Thank you so
Yes, I will give you that, and I will also agree with the more tragic elements that you mentioned as well. But yeah, I can't deny it. Haymitch is daddy. Becca, what are your thoughts? What did you think about going in as having Haymitch as a protagonist, and how did it turn out in the end for you?
I loved it. I am actually have one who have always wanted this story, so I was very excited, but I
It's your
think
fault. You're the
it's my
one.
fault.
You
I'm
did
so
this
sorry
to
you didn't get
us.
your Phoenix story.
No,
I was manifesting
It's
this.
it's coming. They're never gonna stop making these.
No, but I mean, all glory to you and your manifestation powers, because truly good
Thank you.
book. Sorry to interrupt.
Um, I think weirdly, like, I don't know, I'm like a second book in the series apologist because like normally that's the book that everyone hates. And I think Catching Fire is one of my favorite books ever, let alone like the second in the series. And this just brings so much more of that world to life. So I was loving it, and that's what I wanted. But you also asked like what we kind of didn't know about Haymitch before. And I think, I opened the book, I started reading the chapters, I was like, oh God, there's a mom and a brother. That's not going to end well because we've never heard about them before. So I was like, fuck, what's going to happen to them? Also, how he was reaped, because that is like, you literally, I was like, okay, yeah, like his name gets pulled out, obviously. And then, nope, total turn. Like, obviously the guy runs, and then Haymitch tries to help his girl, and then Drusilla is like, okay, well, I'm picking you. And then she fakes pulling his name out, and I was shook from that, to be totally honest.
That is a great point because it's such an unexpected turn. You kind of think like, well, yeah, as you said, Haymitch is going to get his name pulled, and when it's not pulled, you're like,
Yeah,
what is going on? Where are we going now? And then I don't know. Again, going back to the world we're living in, we're dealing right now currently with this situation, this this horrific event where we have sent people to El Salvador prisons, claiming that they are gang members or that we have a justification, and now being revealed that even if that there was a justification, the fake justification doesn't even hold up. That many of these people are not gang members, that there have been clerical errors, I think is the word that I heard today. And this is what this is. This is a clerical error in the reaping, and no one cares because it's
yeah,
District 12. It's the capital needs to get what it needs. They pull this kid in. No one's going to protest it. And he, the narrative is rewritten in front of our eyes, so that no
yeah.
one even realizes it. It's terrifying, honestly, and it feels very much closer to reality these days. Um, yeah, I guess all I will add about Haymitch before I turn it over to Jessica is that I found it interesting how much I related to Haymitch in a
Hmm.
different way. Like one thing that connected me to the first novels was I had not seen a male character like Peeta before. As someone who grew up feeling outside the aggressive sort of male, peer environment that was around me, who was more attracted to arts and beauty and sensitivity, but was also not a pushover. Didn't felt like I could stand up for myself. I just felt like I related to this character big time. And what I found so interesting about Haymitch is he's really, when we open up the book, he's really a lover at heart. his entire world is about his girl, and he just like wants to be with her all the time, and the entire world revolves around that. And it just makes, everything that comes so much more painful, which is so interesting. But I remember that feeling like that in high school, where that, you weren't worried about what was happening in the world or bigger events because like life was so small, and being thrust into something bigger is really, one of those, I guess, life trials that forces you to mature. Jessica, what are your thoughts on Haymitch as a protagonist? I know you particularly love this character.
I do love this character, and probably for a lot of the reasons you just talked about. Like, he's masculine without being toxic. He isn't about force first, but he's strong. But what I really like about learning this book and Haymitch in this book is that he has a rebel spirit, that yes, I think is lit by his love for his girl because he doesn't want to look like he doesn't want to look like he doesn't care about the cause on TV in front of her. That's, I mean, a little bit of maybe narcissism, but I mean, I think he has this rebel spirit. He says yes to things much quicker than I would. Like, they're like, you're gonna make this bomb and blow up this thing, and I'd be like, oh, am I? How am I gonna do? Like, and he just goes and does it and starts, like Frodoing over to the end, like doing. And so I like seeing that part of that old buried part of Haymitch, that you see that he's drunk, he's drink, left at the end of a bottle, he doesn't touch anymore, and that like Katniss and Peeta have to relight, and so I love seeing that about him. I love seeing his rebel heart. I liked when he just had these little conversations with all the girls again, like Maisie with the poster reference, and to let him paint our poster, and all of that stuff was just really wonderful. The only thing I didn't totally buy is in the end, in the epilogue with Haymitch, he says that his best friend's daughter is Katniss, right? And I don't know if that was always decided, and maybe I'm wrong, because he didn't seem to approach Katniss as his best friend's daughter in the original Hunger Games. But am I wrong? I am actually asking the group because I believed very much everything about Haymitch until that end, and I was like, wait, I love that it's his best friend's daughter. Don't get me wrong, I love that part. But am I wrong? It didn't seem like Haymitch treated her like that in the Hunger Games, unless he was just trying to pretend he didn't care about her. And
I mean, they seem to explain it by saying that he drove his closest friends away out of fear of
okay,
them getting hurt. But I would agree that I think it's the most retconny
that was
thing
the closest.
in there. Yeah, because you're like you have to accept that he's just closed off and doesn't bring this up with Katniss, and I can buy that to some degree, but I do think it takes a little stretch of the imagination. I don't know.
Yeah,
What do you think, Becca and Ashley?
I was gonna say, yeah, I think you mentioned this earlier, Bryant, how like he's trying intentionally pushing everyone away, like, and how he thinks it's to protect them. But I do find it, yeah, a little hard to believe that Katniss had like no inclination that like Haymitch was her dad's best friend. Um, but I think he just was in such a dark place at the end of, not the epilogue, but like at the end of this book because of all of like I was reading this at 1 in the morning, so I was a little unhinged myself, but I was like, oh, a lot is happening right now, like in these last 20
Yeah.
pages. And so I feel like my suspense of disbelief there was also like what you said, Brian, like he's just pushing everyone away. And like maybe, we've got 24 years until he really meets Katniss. So maybe, he doesn't want her to know these things. This might be a slight veer, but I also think about how like Haymitch goes through this whole process of not trusting Plutarch, and Katniss has like the same arc. Like Haymitch never says anything to her about Plutarch, and I was like picked up on that. I was like, wait, I feel like I'm missing something here because Haymitch does know about Plutarch and that he's on their side. Anyways, maybe something to unpack later.
It's really interesting too because you are left to put it together a little bit how the rebellion forms. Like, I mean, we always kind
Yeah,
of knew that Haymitch and Plutarch and Cinna and a few others had plans, at least during Catching Fire, and maybe even before that. But this really I guess what I'm kind of realizing as you say this, Becca, is like maybe that's the answer for why we don't hear this stuff about um what's his name?
Plutarch?
No, Mr. Everdeen.
Mr.
I
Everdeen.
can't remember
Oh,
his what he has some sort of strange name I'm forgetting
It's
right
like
now.
that's
Broderick or
Broderick or
that's
something.
how
Broderick.
much of an impact he's had.
Um well what I guess what I'm realizing is the hope that Haymitch is given is Plutarch's plea. He's saying, "Hey, we can topple this. You can help me. That can give purpose to your life. So if your purpose is to appear as a drunk and potentially like foment an uprising, I guess I could buy like, well, I'm not going to attach myself to anybody that I have even a remote, you know, care for because I'm probably going to die doing this, and so is anyone else attached to me. You know, sort of a suicide pact all these people are making. So,
I think
I
what
also
we're
think, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ashley.
I
Sorry.
was gonna say, I think what we're really coming up against is this is where the YA really shows itself, right? Because sometimes the door locks because the door just has to lock. And under certain auspices, you don't have to explain why the door locks.
you're
And I
right.
think we are getting really creative retcons. And as someone who lived through Spider-Man making a deal with the devil over his aunt's soul, this is all very manageable. But um, I think, yeah, that's what I think. It's a bit of, wouldn't this be a cool Easter egg? I'm not going to worry about it too much. But I like giving Haymitch the credit that it is this great long con that he's running as part of the plan. But I think it's actually a weakness in the format.
Well,
Oh,
and go ahead, Jessica.
do we think he's a drunk because of that? I thought he was drunk because of all his pain, and he's just, yeah. I mean, or do you think that's part of it?
I think it's a little bit of column A, a little column B. Like I
Okay.
would say that I
Yeah.
think he wants to be part of the solution, but he is also horribly damaged and unable to control. He's
Yeah.
self-medicating, you know, but I think we see that in the books sometimes. You know, we see him sober up, he's helpful, falls off the wagon.
Yeah.
Sobers up, helpful, falls off the wagon, you know, like so I think he's just incredibly damaged, but is still trying to do
And
things. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think he wants people to think that he's actually dumber than
Yeah.
he is. Like
Hmm.
he even in some of his binges throughout the series, he's never completely useless. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think Bryant nailed it that it's like trying to, yeah, have your cake and eat it too. Or I guess have your bottle and drink it too.
And they do kind of, I guess that is what they're establishing in the book. He's the rascal. He's on that. So yeah, it's, I mean, he's playing that character all the way through his whole life. Okay, I agree.
It's gonna be fun to see in the film adaptation, right? To be like, ooh, how are we gonna earn this? Ooh.
Right. No, definitely. And it will also be really interesting to look at I guess the reread value of going back to the original trilogy and reading it with these new eyes for various characters and their connections. Very interesting stuff. Are there any other characters that, I mean, I assume there are, but is there any other characters that anyone wants to specifically talk about? There's a
I
whole
just want to,
cast.
I'm going to shout the doves. Any dove is very cool to me. Um, it's, I think I find this as somebody who immigrated to the United States. I can't always see what groups of people and what like American subcultures the districts are supposed to be representing. Like some of them are more clear to me than others. And
Hmm.
just like the States, there's a lot in the middle where I'm like, I don't know what happens here. I know the little house on the prairie is in the middle, and that's pretty much it. Um, and I think the doves are a really clear anthropological example of like this is Appalachian culture from a certain time that's sort of then been percolated and evolved to reflect this world. So anytime we can sort of drill down on, I guess, the wild spirit that comes from them, like I just thought they were cool. I thought they were a nice crop of people I would like to see more of.
The Covey have become such an interesting people,
Yeah.
and yeah, I thought it was such a I don't know, it seemed out of left field when it was in Songbirds and Snakes, and it's become such you know, integral part of the world. Any other characters that anyone wants to, or go ahead, Jessica, if you
Well,
had
I
something.
guess, well, speaking of the Covey and like Lenore and Lucy. I want to kind of go back to Lucy for a minute. So the two uncles, or the dads, or the Tam and
Tam and
Clerk.
Clem, is it? Or is it Clerk?
Yeah, Clerk. Are they?
Yeah.
They're the same. They were Lucy. They were in the group that was raising Lucy too, right? So they're older and wait.
Yeah, my
Yes.
understanding is that they were all rounded up. Some of the adults that fought back were
Yeah.
killed, and then the older kids raised essentially the younger kids, and that was the start of the Covey in District
Okay.
12.
Because they say when Lenore's died, like, oh, it's happening again,
Yeah.
which I assume is a reference to Lucy. And then do we think Lucy, this is always my thing, now that we've read this book, do we think Lucy died? Or do we think she had a child, then died later? Because we see her
We
grave.
see her grave. I don't
I,
know.
that's like, I'm assuming there's another book because I don't know the answer to that
Look,
question.
this is all I'm saying.
But
She done died.
well, she definitely
And
died, but
no,
did
but I
she?
mean, like, she died quickly and painfully, right?
That well, I just want to know if Snow met his match and he's so, that he was not the one who killed her. That's what I'm curious. Like, was he able to kill her, or did she have a little bit of a life and then die some other way? Like, did she have a child? Like, I don't know. Or did
Yeah,
her,
did she live free for a bit? Like, did she escape that moment that we have in the book, or did she die? Because it's
yeah,
not clear from Snow's point of view. He thinks he might have killed her, but he doesn't really confirm it.
yeah,
I almost feel, I'm open to hearing anyone else's thoughts, but I almost feel like this is the mystery of that is kind of cool to leave,
yeah,
because we don't need to know. It's interesting to know that she did die, that there's proof of her death, but you can almost imagine either way as a
yeah.
reader. You could imagine like that Snow killed her and her people buried her, or you could imagine she lived some life of brief freedom before dying.
And I guess he did meet his match because he met Katniss, but like
It
I just,
definitely,
I just
District
was stuck
12
in
got
that
back at him, yeah.
one. True. It came full circle, but yeah.
While I was reading, I was like drawing like a map and a chart, and I was like, okay, Lucy is the 10th Hunger Games. This is 40 years later. And so she's the great grandmother, like trying to map it all out. So I think in my universe, she is directly related to Lenore and she does have a child.
Yeah.
I have no basis of fact for this assumption whatsoever, but just because I was like drawing out the timeline, I was like, I decided that they're related. I don't know. Who knows?
Well, and I don't know if this is in the book. I'm assuming it is, but I saw someone online mention that uh, Clerk is the fiddler at Finnick and Annie's wedding. So he's still with the
Mm,
group. He's the only one I think of the Covey that makes it to District 12 or no, 13. So
gotta
interesting.
reread.
Yeah, lots of things to, piece together. Fun stuff. Um, Let me ask one other question before we take a quick break. I guess I'll just put it this way. With every story we talk about the inherent themes and values present within the story. I think this one is filled filled with lots of subjects that we could discuss, lots of thematic subjects. But are there any particularly that stand out to you when we approach that subject? Is there one, I guess, thematic subject or theme of the book that you think shines brighter than the rest? Ashley, I'll throw it back to you first.
I think there's a real through line with Haymitch, which is something that really works about the prequelization of this particular publication, is that sometimes all you can do is all you can do, and that is good enough. We see him try to take monumental action all the way through to the end of Mockingjay, and very rarely is he able to initiate what he wants or accomplish it in a way he wants. More than almost any other character, he's sort of the Miles O'Brien, like, Haymitch will be punished for the audacity of trying, but because the audacity of hope, I think that's the actual book title. But because he has made all of these incremental steps, it does allow for Professor Snow, Jesus Christ, President Snow, to
He
eventually
might be a
meet.
professor. He might have
I don't want
nominated
to.
himself.
I don't want to give anyone named
No,
Coriolanus
number
that
one
kind of
peacekeeper, right?
respect.
Number one peacekeeper in Panem.
Yeah,
Whew.
Snow University, you're gonna love it. Uh, but I do think, and it's also because this is not a Katniss story. This is not the chosen one narrative, so there
Hmm.
has to be a level of failure in it. But he fails more trying to do what's right, I think, than any other Hunger Games character we've seen so far. But it's not in vain, and I think that's really sad and lovely, which is where I think Suzanne Collins' work in this universe sits at its best.
That's a great point. I mean, he really grind like that. He life grinds him into a fine pulp, and he keeps
Gets his
going.
grind on,
Yeah.
has his mushroom coffee in the morning.
Whew. Um, Becca, what are your thoughts? Is there a theme that stands out to you more clearly than the others?
I just keep going. I don't know if this is a theme, but I just keep going back to like the one line at the beginning where Haymitch like gets a bottle of alcohol for his birthday, and he's like, "I don't drink," and I was like, "Wait, yeah, you do." Um, I don't know. I feel like that's important for some reason, but I don't know why. It's like that. Yeah, the grinding you down and like this whole book, they have these grand aspirations, and Haymitch is like convinced. He's like, yeah, I'm just gonna like go down to the sub A level. I'm gonna blow up this water tank. I'm gonna blow up the arena, and then we're gonna take over the capital. Yeah, easy, no problem with a potato. And you're like, in your head, you're like, no, dude, this is happening in 25 years. You've got to be like oppressed for 25 more years. Again, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I was thinking about the whole time of like like this, just watching this character like unravel and a little bit of like his ego and why he becomes the person he becomes in the original trilogy.
You know, it's interesting, Becca, because I feel like that it does open up a lot of things when you say that, because I feel like what is really interesting that I'm realizing as you say that is that Haymitch has lived with a promise to his dying lover for years, and the promise is he talks about it at the end of the book. It's promise is not something that he necessarily wants to do. He's not looking for this mission, you know.
Yeah.
He
He gets
believes
roped
in it.
into it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, he believes in the cause. I think he hates the capital, but he's not looking to
Yeah.
devote his life to bringing the capital down. And it's only because he promises this to her that I think that we don't end up with him just like, taking his own life or just, dying within the bottle. He feels an obligation. And what is realistic about this, even though it is a retcon, is the idea that he lives with that alone, that he doesn't share that with anyone. He doesn't share that
Yeah.
with the kids that he's mentoring. And part of that, I wonder if it's fear, because I'm thinking right now of scenes I remember where he's discussing with Katniss and Peeta separately, like how we're going to protect the other one, what kind of choices you have to
Yeah.
make, if you feel this way or if you feel that way. Now, through the perspective or the spectrum of like, well, he made choices and they resulted in everyone he loved dying. And what kind of guilt, what is he thinking about when he offers advice to someone who is in even a situation that smells a little bit similar. Um, it's really interesting stuff to go back and sort of decipher and sort of break down the character like that.
Lots of little nuggets and little trails that she's leaving for us.
But yeah, they think trauma and pain are definitely clearly big in the thematic department.
Clear theme. Yeah, unfortunately.
Jessica, what are your thoughts thematically? What stands out to you?
Well, off of trauma and pain, I mean, grief is clearly the main, like one of the main themes, because I mean, we've got Edgar Allan Poe going through this whole thing, which all the poems are about a man overcome with grief, paralyzed by it. Um, and which I don't know, I still am deciding if I like the poem through the I do like song through
Hmm.
the songs from the book and everything and the original stuff, and I'm still deciding about the Edgar Allan Poe stuff, but I do think it's obviously very relevant to what's going on in the book. But like I think not only personal grief that Haymitch is going through, but grief is like it doesn't have a linear, you don't experience it in a linear fashion.
Yeah.
It comes and goes, it leaves you, and it paralyzes you at times. And I think that Snow uses grief as a weapon, and he does it through the whole Hunger Games by the pain and the trauma that he inflicts on people. And he knows that the worst one is the grief that you're gonna feel. You know, how I think there's like that how that can really damage a person because he when he really wants to hurt someone, that is how he goes at them. And I have to believe it's because of it's the only thing that ever hurt him. But I'm not convinced he ever loved anyone, but I'm gonna let him have the other book, whatever. But yeah, so grief is the big one for me, and it ties all into the pain and trauma, but I do think it also ties into some of the political things that she's trying to say too, because it's weaponized quite often. Not just for one person, but for an entire district or all the districts. And that's how he's using it to control a lot of them. So,
I want to add one interesting thing because I understand the point you make about the songs and the like original poetry versus Poe. But
yeah.
what I thought was interesting about Poe is that he enlisted in the army and then rage quit after his training because he was so bad at it. And I think Suzanne Collins is smart enough that that layer is also important to like the Haymitch's evolution that we see. And its effectiveness,
Sure.
you know,
That's a
like
good
your
point.
Lejeune may vary, but I just think that's like a fun fact.
No, that is great. That is great. Yeah, grief, I mean, I think is such a important thing, especially and maybe we can talk about this when we come back from the break, but the idea once again of generational stories and generational trauma. I mean, when we look at District 12, especially looking at it in these three time periods, where you songbirds and snakes, then the quarter quell, then Katniss's trilogy. The entire district is crushed, and you know, we see the specifics of how, some people have it a little bit worse than others, but no one has it well. No one is living well in this society. Everyone is crushed under some sort of trauma, and we see that revealed in this book with the humanization of Maisley, and Haymitch's realization, I guess, that of who the real enemy is. Well, let's take a quick break. I do want to come back and dive into a few more themes, but we've been having some great discussion. We'll be back in just a minute.
Hi, this is Barbara Dillon, voice of Katniss Everdeen in the award-winning audio drama, The Katniss Chronicles. The Katniss Chronicles is a fan-made production which adapted Suzanne Collins' best-selling Hunger Games books into over 70 original and stunning audio episodes. Be sure to visit thekatnisschronicles.com. May the odds be ever in your favor.
Welcome back, listeners. All right, so we're diving back into Sunrise on the Reaping, the latest prequel in the Hunger Games book series, and we were just talking about themes. We touched on a number of great topics, but I do want to dive a little bit deeper. One of the really interesting things that is in the acknowledgments page of this book is that Suzanne Collins talks about how the inspiration for some of this book came from conversations with her father about Scottish philosopher, philosopher, David Hume. Specifically, we talk about the idea of implicit submission, and we see this very specifically with conversations between Haymitch and Plutarch, and then Haymitch considering them themselves. There's a bit of dialogue where Plutarch essentially makes Haymitch consider why why the districts allow the capital to do this to them. If the districts have more people, the districts technically have more power, or the power to change it. Why do they submit? Why do they put up with this? And that comes up again and again, in the book. I would love to just take some time to talk about this idea of implicit submission, and especially, I mean, in the world that we're living in right now, where we see wealth disparity at historic places, where we see, we talked a little bit about it. So inhumane behavior being projected upon various minorities, various communities, and now to some degree, even the citizenship at large, you could argue, these days. What what does this book have to say about that? What does it have to say about why we have implicit submission within our own world and in the world of the Hunger Games? Jessica, why don't you start us off on this one?
Yay. Like, um, it's so, you know, I thought about this a lot because, Haymitch deals with it quite a few times, and I know Maisie gets very angry with him when he, like, I think the most physical version of it in this story is when he doesn't think about that.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. So I think one of the most like specific and physical versions of this implicit submission is when Haymitch doesn't help Maisie, he freezes, he doesn't in the arena, and she gets really angry with him, and he has to kind of think about why he didn't do that, he didn't stand up. And I mean, I think there's a little bit of just instinctual part, like human, you want to live, you don't want to die, your fear takes over. And I think in a system that we've all, like, if we apply like a system like Panama in our system, like here in the US right now, where you have been raised to believe that these systems are in place and are very hard to change, especially if you even tried to change them. You've definitely hit walls, if you've gone to, you've protested, you've called, you've done things, you've had successes and you've had failures. But now we're seeing people get hurt, and we're all seeing it. And I just think there's a lot of that that fear is hard to overcome, to realize, to break out of that, the fear that no one else will join you, that no one else will have your back, that you'll be standing alone and be destroyed for it. We see that in our leaders right now. Like, they're asking us to hit the streets and go to Tesla, and the people are going to have to solve this. I hear that a lot. And I'm like, well, why are the people going to have to solve this? We have leaders, we have law firms we have law firms bending the knee. We've got leaders bending the knee. We've got universities bending the knee. They're giant institutions, and you're watching them not stand up. And then they're looking to the people like, you should go to the street, get hit, get taken away to El Salvador, and it's very complicated because it's so, and I don't even know where I've gone off on just what we're experiencing, but I think fear is at the very heart of it. And I think what Hunger Games does really well is when it shows the people involved that they're all together, that there is a chance. I think that is what Rue did. I think that's what Katniss did. When you start to visually see that everyone is agreeing with your side, then you start to feel safer and you feel like you can stand up. And I do think part of what makes humans is that we're herd animals. I hate to say it. We like to be in the tribe. We like to, and I do think that plays a lot into implicit, like that submission. We submit until we think that we have enough people. It's hard not to submit when you're all by yourself like that. I think that's why there are people, they study people. Oh, actually, I'm reading Overstory, which is a book and there's a guy in there who's studying people who are idealists, people who will take that stand when no one else will take that stand, because he thinks they're wired differently. And I think I'm prone to agree with that. They're wired differently. And I think a lot of people are wired to wait. Sorry, that was
No,
long.
no, I think all of that is a lot of very interesting uh things about this topic because I mean I guess what it illustrates to me too is it brings me back to a discussion that I had a lot with the original Hunger Games book where people would be like, yeah, it's a cool book. People would never do that. No one would, stand by and let their kid go into the arena. And I just would sit there and be like, I feel like, am I crazy? Because I know human history and I know we did put people in arenas and people did stand by and I think that the idea of implicit submission is present within the concept of the Hunger Games. If you have made a submissive society that feels that it has to give up its young uh, periodically as tribute to a larger nation. That society is already submitted in many ways. I mean, and we see it differently with the career districts where they're trying to integrate to some degree with the capital ideals. They assume those values on their own. At least in District 12, we see that it's different in the sense that most people reject the capital, even though they're underneath the thumb. But it is very interesting because I guess just talking about this brings up the question of like, well, what does it say about our society that we can't imagine that this could be a possibility, that people would do this or feel compelled to do this in the right circumstances? It's interesting
But
to
we do.
contemplate, Go ahead,
We
good.
no, we do this.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't want to make anyone really angry, but when we send our children off to war, and we let them enroll, they're not getting drafted, and we go to and there's wars that you don't agree with necessarily, and it's all about money most of the time. It's not like World War. It's not like we're not going to go save a group of people. We're not trying to like bring liberation anywhere. Most of our most current wars haven't been about that. And so we do it. We've been told that it's like patriotic, which is what they say about the games. They're patriotic. They're keeping the peace. And that's not too far off from sending your
Oh,
children to war.
Jessica, you're like you're blowing my mind a little bit because that is the draft. I mean, like
Yes, the
that's why
draft.
people sit here and say this couldn't happen, and it's like, well, why don't we remember the '60s when
It's like people,
people were
but
pulling names and they were sending these kids, and what was the point? Was it any more? Did it have
Well,
a bigger point than the Hunger Games?
we did and I mean, we as sort of the nation and governing body did recently burn a book called The History of the Third Reich, which contains the very famous quote, translated in English, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Not to run too far down the rabbit hole in the American public education system, but perhaps I think this illustrates why these books are important, not only because they're well written, they're cool stories, they'll engage your love of reading and storytelling, but you, they can also teach you a lot, and they can probably push a lot of people's point of views to ask these questions in the first place. Because Brian, I think you nailed it when you were like, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, it's cool, but it's fiction, and you're like, barely, in the way that like Octavia Butler is ostensibly filed under fiction, but if
Right.
you
Mm-hmm.
live
Yeah.
in Los Angeles in particular, you're like, I think she's a witch, and I mean that as a huge compliment.
Becca, what are your thoughts on what this book has to say about like the submission in our society?
I was thinking a lot about a couple things. Again, sorry if this doesn't answer your question, but the only POV that we've seen is from District 12 in any of the five books. So I am, this has got me thinking like, what is it like in District 1 where, as you guys said, like they are trying to play nice and sort of cater to the capital and, training their children to be the best. Um, but I also think about like the geography. And I feel like when I read The Hunger Games, there were a lot of like maps and like, oh, this is where District 12 is, and this is where, District 1 is. And it was like, oh, this kind of makes sense because now we have a lot of like state against state, and the Hunger Games has really set up, district against district. Like, yeah, there's more of them, but like, even when they're setting up like the newcomers and the careers, like, they're not all aligned. Like, it's not like they're all going to play nice and play together. And I just feel like that is a real parallel to like the states. Um, that I don't know that maybe I'm not articulating that well, but like
No,
that's
no, I
just
think you
something that's
are.
been running through my mind.
Well, it's the key to what we're asking. The key, I guess, if we go to young Plutarch in this book, when he asks, "Why don't you do what, why don't you do this? Why don't you stand up against this?" The system's designed to divide everyone. I mean, we see in the
Yeah.
original trilogy how do they succeed? They succeed when Katniss and allies from the capital and allies from the other districts start saying we're not enemies with each other. The enemy it's us versus them. It's Snow. Um, and even
And you
that
have a whole
goes
secret district that
right.
appears to
And
be like,
well,
actually, we're doing this.
Well, and then you also have, I mean, that idea is pushed further when you go like, well, we also take out coin too, because the we it's not
That didn't go
we have
great
arrows for
either.
everyone.
Yeah.
But I think the point being is that Katniss is one of those inciting she's an inciting character. She takes action that others for whatever reason don't feel that they can or resist doing. And I think what is interesting to me, and I know we have it in our discussion points to talk about this idea, this NPR article where they were talking about how the book speaks to how well we know our history. The fact that the district individuals don't know their history, and that's keeps them as a disadvantage. They don't know the history of these rebellions, the history of the successes, the attempts, and that keeps them from building faster on top of each other.
They
Um,
also can't really travel between districts.
right, right. They don't
So
have any
it's like,
connection with others. So, but I guess what and Becca, maybe I can throw this back to you to get your response. One thing that is spurred by those thoughts and what you're saying is one thing that seems connected to implicit submission is this idea that lose we lose like firsthand knowledge of things that have happened. When I think about the protests and the draft and things like that, there's people in these generations, in my generation and beyond, who can't imagine that happening. We know it happened. It's in the books, it's in history, but they can't imagine
yeah.
the feeling of like, well, what if my name was being picked? What if the government was saying, go to Vietnam or go to Canada or go to jail, like that's it. And now the reality is starting to set in, but I still feel like our citizens are kind of unaware. And it almost feels like when I'm looking at history, and I think these books reflect this, that there's a period of time where we retain the values or the knowledge from lessons where we get freedoms, where we make advancement. And then it's almost like the way wealth, someone acquires wealth and then their kids come in and they don't appreciate the wealth as much. And so they don't have the same ambition or motivation or don't understand the concepts the same. It seems like this is present within the human species in regards to our fight for freedom and equality. Like we have to fight these fights over and over because generationally we lose the knowledge of it or the importance of it is
Well,
almost what I suggest.
you also have to like want to do your homework. And I think a lot of people are honestly just a little bit lazy. Like you have to look at the information that is presented to you and actually know how to read that and understand that. And like, are you being told the whole truth or not, just to get into sort of like the propaganda piece of it and like the social media piece of it. I mean, even like yesterday was April Fool's Day. I was like, I can't even go on the internet because April Fool's Day drives me mad
Oh
and I
yeah.
hate it so much and all the stupid pranks that people pull. But like, I was really thinking about that a lot because it was like the way that you're presented on social media versus how you really are. I was also thinking about like every state teaches you different things. Like when I grew up in Virginia, and like the history that I learned is probably totally different from what you learned, Bryant.
Yep.
And it's just like they don't make it easy. Like you really have to be aware that this is something that is happening. And I think that it's just so well captured, and they're so District 12 in particular are so isolated, and like they sometimes they can't even watch the Hunger Games because people didn't have TVs, like to bring it back to that, like they don't even have the access to the information to let alone be able to like go and do their research.
Well, and Ashley and Jessica, I'd love to bring this back to get you back into the conversation on this topic as well. But just to add on what you're saying, Becca, people are, I think there's two topics here that are really interesting. There's the idea that psychologically, or the way our minds work, we can be overwhelmed and programmed by this information, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I mean, we can be aware of it, but that still doesn't necessarily prevent it from happening to us under the right circumstances. And then there's also, um, I would kind of qualify that as the laziness, or the like the idea of like we can't deal with the information, so we just kind of, disassociate from it. But there's also this idea of like when we look at the parallels of our world and District 12, if you keep people at survival level, they don't have the ability to think about those things. We've seen studies that show that mental health or mental capabilities drop when you're homeless because of what that trauma does to you. And these people live in trauma all the time, and they are only worried about making sure people don't starve today. So how can they make a rebellion? Ashley, Jessica, what are your thoughts on the idea of this loss of, I guess, really important knowledge as we move through like generational, I guess, passing of the torch for, the fight for rights or freedom?
That's actually something that I think about a lot in my day-to-day life because like I'm an immigrant who's the child of colonizers. So even though you can choose to move to a different part of the world or a different city or whatever, like that's still a trauma and it's like a loss of connection. And so to go back to the idea of like doing your own research, that's something that like there's traditional knowledge and folk tales and medicines that like doesn't make it to me because of all these other incumbent things in the past. And I know that is a leap from what we see in the Hunger Games, but the Covey I think are a really clear microcosmic example of that because we hadn't, I don't think we'd heard of them for the Hunger Games, and then you meet them in Songbirds and Snakes,
Right.
and they do, Brian. I agree. I think they're a little clunkily placed. I think that book sometimes feels like it's two books, even though I like everything that's contained in it. And then we get this really interesting evolution of them in this book, and then the seeds planted that, like, oh yeah, he did live all the way to the end, and he did
Right,
get to
right.
see the world in its good time. And I think that can feel very removed from who we are as people, and that's a trauma that we carry because it is harder to imagine walking down to the Coliseum with your baseball bat and hoping that you come out of it. But there's a quote that I heard on Reddit, which means it almost certainly didn't come from there. That's, what do we call the German people who were not Nazis but lived through Nazi Germany? We call them Nazis. And I think that is very much at the heart of the hero characters in particular that we have in this franchise, that even if it takes something horrible, and I mean it's always something horrible, but particularly like what happened to Haymitch in this book, to radicalize you, that it's worth doing even when it's hard.
It's almost what choice do you have? It with these characters, Katniss, Peeta, Haymitch, we see them struggle with this. It's like they go, who am I? Who am I if I kill people? Who am I if I don't? Who am I if I don't respond the way that my heart is telling me to respond in these situations, even if that means suffering, even if that means hopelessness. And what's really interesting about what you're saying too, Ashley, is I hadn't really put it together, but it's also completely in the DNA of the book, because that's literally like the title is about a reference to, Lenore Dove talking about Haymitch shouldn't assume that the sun's going to come up every day. And that's part of what we're fighting. I think he has a line at some point about like part of the problem is we don't believe we can do these things. We don't believe anything can change, so we don't attempt to change it. And she's really trying to teach him to not make that assumption, to assume that things can change, that someone can, that it's not inevitable, that you're not going to have a reaping forever. And I think that ties into what we're saying, where it's very easy if you pass a couple generations to believe, well, this is the way the world is and it's never going to change. Nothing can ever happen. But it's really just people making decisions and imposing things on others. Jessica, what are your thoughts on this idea of generational knowledge, or I guess struggle?
Well, I think we're losing a lot of it. I mean, if my mom would teach this class and she would, I'm going to kill this, so I'm not going to get into it, but like she would talk about the Holocaust with her students, and she had this article she would share with them. And it was like, how many kids that are a certain age right now, like teens to like 25, that don't have like a real educational or personal understanding of the Holocaust, just understanding how big it was, how many people there were. Like it hasn't been taught to them in a way that they understand it. And they get to college and God, the number is very bad. I can't remember it. Who don't even like really think it's that big of a deal because they don't really understand it, right? And then you can apply that to something like Vietnam, the draft like we were talking about. And, I happen to have a father who was drafted. He didn't go to Vietnam, but I have an uncle. And, you're a certain age, you have all these family members who were drafted at some point. They all served, whether they went or just did other things. And that's not true anymore because young people don't have that experience. And now we're living in this time of social media where we're watching the truth disintegrate, our stories disintegrate before our eyes, not to be super bleak, but like, some of my friends who have family members, and I mean, I have family members too, that have a diehard Trump supporter still, right? They are not experiencing the news the way we're experiencing news. They're not experiencing our shared reality the way that we're experiencing it. And where people I know have success with Trump supporters is right now specifically, is when they know something like, say, Ukraine, right? When somebody knows what Trump is saying about Ukraine is not true. They know that to be true because they have people that have lived in Ukraine and they understand it and they have a shared story and they have a personal connection to that history that then they start to realize what they're being told is not true. And I have a friend whose, parents have disengaged from all of the bad media that they've been listening to because through that truth, they were able to realize how much they were being lied to, right? And so it is possible for people to realize that they're getting the wrong stories. But there has to be a connection and it's important. And that's why the Covey are so important, I think. And I'm glad she added them because they're telling their stories constantly through song, through performance, through art. And that's why they have this wildness. I'm not even quite sure I think that I'm so surprised they're allowed to continue half the time because they're doing something through oral tradition that everybody else has lost in the story, which you can see how it affects them as a group. They're stronger. They all think for themselves, and so I don't know. I think we have a lot of fighting to do, but I do think there is something to this keeping in contact with people that that you really disagree with, because eventually some of them you're going to pull them back and they're going to have to reckon with whatever they supported, right? But like, I think there's something very important to that storytelling component and that retelling these stories. And when I say stories, I'm talking about history at this point. I'm talking about like 3 months ago history. I'm watching January 6th, become something else entirely. You're just watching it transform and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, and how do we not, because that's the most tragic part of the whole book where I almost just fell to my knees is when Haymitch is watching his Hunger Games. And it's not anything that happened, and it's making him look like a complete buffoon and not important, and if nothing he did mattered. In fact, everything that he did that he thought mattered is just going to blow up in his face, and it didn't make a difference. And that's like, I don't know. I've gone in the circles again, but
No, it's a good point because it ties into everything that we're dealing with with the I mean the first books when we got into like Mockingjay specifically. I mean, it was through all of it, but Mockingjay, they literally get into a propaganda war, where it's like whose propaganda is going to work, and does it matter if it's real, or does it matter what it inspires? And we have a lot of that going on here, and that scene that you mentioned is horrific from Haymitch's point of view, but I hadn't put together what you're saying is that's an element that is a tool of the capital to continue to divide people. They're taking something that Haymitch specifically does things within the arena, knowing, hey, maybe not everyone will see it, but it's done in resistance of the capital. And what do? They strip it out, and that means that certain people, most likely, most importantly, people in the districts are seeing him as just someone who's buying into the system. His power and his voice, his agency is sort of taken away, and it's just used to divide us once again, between the haves and have-nots. So it's a really good point. One thing I wanted to pick up on and throw back to the three of you is this idea of the Covey and community. I guess we're exploring community right now at Fanbase Press. That's our theme of the year. We're doing a build your community initiative, just focusing on comic book creators and creators in general, because it's a hard time, and we just think that that's something that's needed. So if you want to find out more about that, go to fanbasepress.com. But with this story, I find it really interesting how important community and local community is within the story with the Covey, and how they're, as you said, Jessica, they're essentially protecting their local history, or their common history, and building strength and unity through that. And I feel like those are the things that I'm seeing work really well for people who are struggling these days, turning away from larger corporations or organizations, and going more local, getting back to those connections, stepping away from social media sometimes, and actually having face-to-face meetings seems to be going well. But I guess I want to ask two things. Do you think that there's something that this story specifically, Sunrise on the Reaping, has to say about community? And is there anything we can take away from it, I guess, to help with the times we're going through? Becca, why don't you start us off on this one?
Yeah, I first of all, I love that initiative. I'm very excited to hear that that's what you guys are focusing on this year. I think that's great. Um, I think that community is super important, and I think, when you're reading or hearing Katniss specifically singing The Hanging Tree, like you don't even realize where, like, you're not getting the full story, and like how important that the Covey, like their story is and their community is, and how they were the only ones who were like freely roaming the districts until they got rounded up and like sent to District 12. And I think that's part of, they're trying to divide your community to be part of that submission. And so I think it's really important to have these communities, and the way that the community grows in the Hunger Games, where, they pick up Plutarch, they pick up Effie eventually, like, and, turn these people into their community. That's the only way that we're going to get through any of this in the book or in real life, in my opinion.
No, I think you're exactly right. And what is interesting that I think that you noted that I was thinking about as well is how the book represents that by things that are passed through this growing District 12 community and history that these book series have outlined. Like something like the Hanging Tree being established in one book, being sung in another, and then eventually being
Hmm.
used to push things forward to the collapse. Or how, I mean, it could seem so silly, but how natural the passing of the Mockingjay pin. We find out that where it
Yeah.
was forged in this book. We find out
Yes.
how it got to the sister, how eventually it goes to her daughter, and then is passed to Katniss, and then becomes this symbol. And there's just so this genuine history to it, and I feel like I don't know that's such a human thing. It's an important thing for us to have in our lives. Ashley, what do you think this story says about community, and what can we take away from it on that aspect?
It's interesting because at face value, Hunger Games is always community minded. I mean, the Hunger Games is literally the act of it is set up to physically destroy members of your community and members who could be allies. I think that sometimes about being a woman where I'm like, well, if we just decided that all men were trash, we could do whatever we wanted, but we can't get that together, which is why I don't think the Hunger Games is as much of a logically leap as we keep kind of touching back on. Um, what I think this book really illustrates about community is that you have to be prepared to be inconvenienced, and I think that that's something that we as modern people living in the present tense and in the contemporary world, we don't want to be inconvenienced because we live in this like instant oatmeal chat GPT society where we get everything at the touch of our fingers because these characters under the auspices of Panem, unless you're in like I don't know, the capital or maybe the first three districts, again, the career districts. You have no choice but to rely on that. And I think that's why so many people in the rebellion, yes, we have members of the capital here, but like it's mostly the people who are at the very bottom because they're already used to taking these extreme measures. And then you leap that forward and you get the, incredible bombing scene that keeps being referred to of like, yeah, blow it up. Good luck. It's going to take you 25 years. But ultimately, that's where the strength comes from. And I think that's something that we, the readers, are learning more and more. And I think that's also that can be the strength of social media and some of these tools that have also led us down this path, like Book Talk, BookTube, podcasting, YouTube, like all these media that have less less, I won't say no, less gatekeepers are helping us, I think, to reclaim some of that as well. Anyway, I went a couple places. Thank you for joining me on this journey, friends.
We enjoyed it. Jessica, what are your thoughts on what does this book have to say about community? What can we take away from it?
Well, I like what Ashley said about the inconvenience because so much of community is, the community building is inconvenient. It is inconvenient when someone needs help to go help them. Not that you don't want to, it's just that it's inconvenient. And you do have to snap yourself out of it. And it is true the people who are already struggling are better at dealing with inconvenience. And I was just talking to someone the other day, it's like poorest people and the people who are struggling the most are always the first people to show up to help somebody and to thank God for something that they have, right? And that is an interesting thing. And so that's making me kind of understand why District 12 is so at the center of this, I think I mean, I just think Hunger Games is saying community is really hard work. It's really hard work to build something that is true and beautiful that can overcome these kind of obstacles. And even when it's torn apart, it continues. And I do think that's why I like all the symbols of community and the symbols of what that go through and the mocking. I just really while you were talking, I was like, my brain was exploding about this pin because I was just thinking about, Maison and how she made everybody, like how she formed that community and brought everyone together because she cared about how they looked, how they got to present their special, what was it called? Their, my brain's, it's your thing you get
Oh,
to bring into
oh
the thing.
the
It's the thing you bring into the arena, your token. Is it
token, yeah,
your
token.
and it was so important to her to have it be presented well and something to be proud of. And at first that seems kind of, like measly, like, it seems vapid, but it is so important because it represents each of their communities and they're there to represent what is holding them together in this horrible situation, and she gets that. And that's why it's so crazy. And that I something you were just saying, I didn't even think about it, that pin being in her drawer, she's not even, doesn't even care about it, and it, she, and then that comes to be the thing that draws them all together. And that's quite beautiful. Like that just kind of came together for me while you were talking, Brian. I was just thinking about the pin and Maisel and how she was doing all that. And yeah, so to me that it's weird, just these small, it was her taking the time to do that when she should have been doing something else. Like she should have been
Yeah.
getting stronger. Like she's about to die. And instead she's like fixing everyone's token for them. And so
No,
that's all.
it's interesting, because I also like this idea, as you were mentioning, of Ashley's about inconvenience, and when I hear the three of you talk, I guess what it makes me think is that maybe the message is that community is inconvenient and difficult, but it's also worth it. It's this human thing that we do, and we benefit from it. When we're separated, we suffer. When we're together, yes, it might be inconvenient. Yes, there are things you have to deal with people, and I'm a person who doesn't always like to deal with people, but I also see the payoffs of friendships and gatherings and how it changes my spirit to see people, regularly on a regular basis to develop relationships with them. I think maybe consumerism and capitalism is so focused us on other other achievements that you can have in life that we have pulled away from the idea of like there's something in just knowing people and spending time with them that is unquantifiable but incredibly valuable, and it almost reminds me of like I think that is connected to somehow connected to our political structure because it community is supposed to be why you're involved in politics because you're part of the community and you have a say, and we've gotten divided from that a little bit too. I think maybe intentionally because people want that power, and if we're not involved in the community, then we're not involved in making decisions in the community, you know?
In Jessica's opening thesis about her relationship to the Hunger Games and to this book, she concluded by saying people are herd animals, no offense. And I like that we've just come back to that same thesis
We
an
have.
hour later. I was like, man, you really nailed it. We were like, we have time to fill. We're gonna keep going.
Great job, Jessica. Well, we only have about 15 minutes left, but I do want to take some time to just point people in a direction if they're looking for other stories, or other, it doesn't even have to be stories. I mean, when we look at our recommendations, it could be philosophy, it could be art, it could be a poem. But if you have other stories, other things that you think listeners might enjoy, if they either enjoyed Sunrise on the Reaping or if they enjoyed this discussion, I would love to hear what you would suggest. Ashley, why don't you start us off? What would you recommend?
I'm gonna go rogue and recommend the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe. They're fantastic, and I genuinely think the world is worse because we don't read enough poetry. And that's a fun one. That's one that the cultural references to. There's a Simpsons parody. So if nothing else, watch the season 2, the very first Treehouse of Horror, where they do the entire Raven. That's my first recommendation. You can leave the rest of the Poe at home, but just watch Bart and Homer
Excellent.
do the Raven. If you want something that's specifically Hunger Games, I mentioned Octavia E. Butler. Start with Parable of the Sower, and then read everything else she's ever written. You'll see a lot of similar themes, and you'll be very, very disappointed that she's not as lauded a writer as she deserves to be in the current contemporary annals of American literature. And then, if you want something that I think gives you the same level of criticism an examination of where we are right now as people, but is still genre and more uplifting. Watch For All Mankind on Apple TV
What a
Plus.
great show.
It's
Yes.
so good.
Whew.
Joel Kinnaman is amazing in it, but it really is an interesting examination and re-examination of where we are right now through the lens of an alternate history.
And they're about to do sort of a Sunrise kind of
Yeah.
thing where they're doing the Russian version of events now in the spin-off series, right?
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Very
And
exciting.
if you live in the valley, you'll recognize a lot of those roads as they're driving out to JPL.
Well, before I go to Becca and Jessica, I just realized because you made that recommendation, we never got to discuss Poe or folk songs, and I just wanted to get some quick thoughts on what your th feelings were on the idea of including Poe in this and connecting it with Haymitch.
Oh, I'm always pro Poe. I was in Boston last week and we
Hmm.
went to specifically see the Poe statue that's there. Um I genuinely I thought I think I ultimately do agree with the criticism that we've had only original poetry or in-universe poetry up to this
Hmm.
point. So it does feel a touch out of step, but I just really liked it because I like his work. Like if we'd also had I don't know, Ode to a Grecian Urn or something like that, like some Keats, I would have been like, yes, this is just for me. Um, I think I think reading poetry opens your brain up in a really interesting way. So if you never have, I highly encourage it. I think the use of music is very smart and high key. All the adaptations of the songs are pretty good. So there's a couple nice Spotify playlists with great covers. If nothing else, go listen to them while you're finishing up your read.
Excellent, excellent. And what an interesting perspective on how books are viewed in this world, especially District 12. Jessica, what do you recommend?
Let's see. Well, Octavia Butler, because I agree. And although Parable of the Sower tears your heart out, and then it continues to tear your heart out. But it is very creepy because it's very LA right now, so that's disturbing. I also like Ursula Le Guin's Lathe of Heaven. If we're going classic here. But most recently, I did just read the Scythe trilogy, which in the political spectrum right now is very interesting. So if you kind of want to jump into a YA that it's a totally different world, but still a lot of fun. And if you enjoyed Hunger Games, you'll probably enjoy some of the topics that gets covered there as well. As far as TV shows, oh my God, I don't know. I'm gonna not I watch so much TV. I'm just like, what? Yeah. So just that's it for right now for me.
Excellent, excellent.
Yep.
Becca, what would you recommend?
I have terrible taste in books because I read absolute trash. And I love every second of it.
Did we not all admit to
Um,
reading Fourth Wing?
oh yeah,
Oh
I've
yeah,
read
you should
all of
read Fourth
them.
Ring too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Fourth Wing is definitely like an interesting world because they're like at a war college. They're also kids who are, killing each other and it's yeah, definitely was a very easy leap from the Hunger Games into the Fourth Wing world.
Hmm.
Um, the TV show I keep thinking about is Severance.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the one that I would put on as my recommendation. Um, and yeah, if you want, trash romantasy, hit me up.
Oh, and I want to just say one. I want to say Battle Royale. If no one's seen that movie, the Japanese movie,
Sure.
because
Yeah,
it's a good follow-up to a Hunger Games situation.
very
Anyway.
much so. Well, I'll just throw out a few things. If anyone has not watched Andor season one yet, this is a lot of shared thematic content, and we have season two coming up. Really takes me back to discussions we were having earlier about like how divided it can be to like get a group of you know oppressed individuals together because there is infighting, there is competing motives and grudges that we hold against each other. And very often the enemy, the totalitarian enemy, is very united in what they're attempting. But I also throw out just some fan-based press content. We have a new Hunger Games editorial called Spark of Hope by Fanbase Press's Travis Licata that was just posted. And then we have our Fanbase Feature podcast on the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes back from 2020. So I'll put links to both of those in the show notes, but feel free to check them out if you enjoyed this conversation. Um, I want to give a chance to each of you to let people know where they can find you and your work online before we wrap up. So why don't we go around one more time and we'll do that. Jessica, go ahead and start us off.
The easiest place to find me is wickedtreepress.com. I'm on Substack. I write Monster of the Week, which I write about monsters and mythology and kind of explore some of these themes while doing so. And I'm on Blue Sky, but I'm no longer on Instagram and Facebook, so can't find me there anymore.
Ashley?
You can find my podcast, Geek History Lesson, where all fine podcasts are had. We take character histories and break them down for you in about an hour. We have almost 600 episodes, and I think episode 8 was the Districts of Panem. So if you want to hear us real rusty, recording in a closet with no air conditioning, wearing very little clothing, highly recommend going and checking that out. It's a real fun time. You can find me all over the internet at Ashley V. Robinson. The V is very important because Ashley Robinson is a WNBA player. I don't want to fight for SEO, but I do want to meet her. So if you know her, I know she lives in LA. Hit a girl up. If you want to see me doing videos and panel moderating and all kind of stuff like that, I work for Popverse, thepopverse.com, and I'm going to be at C2E2 doing a bunch of main stage stuff all in some weeks from now. I don't know what time is. I got to get on a plane to Chicago someday. And I think that's everything I'm going to plug. Thank you so much.
Excellent. And Becca?
Well, I'm not a creator, so the only thing I can plug is the KATNISS Chronicles,
It's well worth plugging.
which is well worth plugging. As I said at the start of this, it's something that I'm very, very proud of, and I'm lucky enough to get to work with Barbara and Bryant on it. And I just think it's so special and magical. And if you're in the world of the Hunger Games and you want more, then come check us out.
Yes. Over I think over 70 episodes, free to check out, all on Apple Podcasts. Cover all the first 3 books, Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay. So definitely check them out. And Ashley, we feel your pain because I know that Barbara had to trap herself in a closet and record under a blanket at some point during really incredible heat because the air conditioners in our apartment building were making too much noise. So
Look, do you even have a podcast in Los Angeles of any running time if you haven't recorded basically naked with your spouse in a closet? You know what I'm saying?
Yep,
It's a rite of
yep.
passage.
It's nowhere as exciting as it should sound.
No, it's not. It's horrible.
Just pain. It's like what we talked. It's pain and grief and all of those things. Suffering, trauma. But yes, check out the KATNISS Chronicles. And you know what, Becca, Ashley, Jessica, thank you so much for making time for this. This was a fantastic discussion. Definitely could have talked for another hour or 2 on this book, and maybe we will in the future, but really appreciate each of you showing up for this.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Friends, thanks for blowing my mind for so long.
Well, that wraps things up for this episode of the Fanbase Weekly podcast. I'm going to encourage you to like both Fanbase Press and the Fanbase Weekly on Facebook, on Twitter, on Blue Sky, and you can find Fanbase Press on YouTube. You also can subscribe to the podcast by finding the Fanbase Weekly on Apple Podcasts. You can give us ratings and reviews there, which we would very much appreciate. They extend our visibility and help people find us. And you also can become part of the conversation. We have an email. It's the fanbaseweekly@gmail.com. Send us any questions or comments you might have. We'd love to share them in a future episode. Let us know what you thought of Sunrise on the Reaping. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you as well to our sponsor, Hellmouth Con 2025. Presented by Fandom Charities, Hellmouth Con is the ultimate convention for fans of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, and more. This year, the convention is back and bigger than ever, taking place on June 14th and 15th and offering an unforgettable experience for die-hard fans and newcomers alike. You won't want to miss this. They actually hold the convention at the Sunnydale High School location in Torrance, California. For updates, tickets, and announcements, be sure to visit fandomcharities.org/HellmouthCon. Thank you for listening, everyone. Once again, this has been Bryant Dillon for Fanbase Press, where we celebrate fandoms and create new ones. May the odds be ever in your favor.